this one? Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sweet. So thank you guys for having me. Like Melinda said, I'm Rebecca Stimson. My talk's titled Beautiful Monsters, Creating Spaces for Queer Gaming in Monster Factory. And I'll be talking about the video series Monster Factory and some of the ways in which it negotiates its relationship with character creators and normative models of play. This work is still in its fairly early stages, so I really appreciate your feedback. I'm going to be building on a lot of ideas we've actually been talking about throughout the conference, so I hope you don't mind me laying some foundations, even if it's a bit of a recap for some of you. Oh, you have to click the correct thing or it doesn't work. So there are few places where the limitations of games in reflecting the diversity of humans and culture is more, well, visible than character creators. So we have newer character creators that have been widely touted as promoting diversity through almost unlimited customizability. But there's something striking about what's left out. And it's of course reasonable from a game design or coding perspective that character creators have limits on what characters can look like. But those limitations necessarily extend into an ideological position about what humans should be able to look like or want to look like. You can see that especially in the default character in games, which we've talked about a lot this week. That default places whiteness and maleness at the center. Excuse me. And where is it? Where am I? Oh yeah, this default is the kind of person who's at the center of a character creator and a subsequent game, who is literally the middle option of a series of sliders or buttons, who is presented as normal or average. But that shouldn't come to a surprise to any of us here if we just watched the last talk or if you've been watching the talks for the last 2 days. There's a fairly clear consensus that mainstream gaming culture and game design promote a normative vision of personhood. One that's imbued with the values of the dominant culture, patriarchy, white supremacy, so on. And that gaming, while queer or otherwise marginal, is a complicated negotiation of identification and acknowledgement of difference. Avatar creation can erase swaths of humanity without acknowledging the absence. And frequently that invisibility leads us back to the questions of representation that we've been talking about this week. You know, if you can't see yourself in a game, what do you do? Do you play it? Do you play it differently? How do you connect with your avatar if it can't accurately represent you or your experiences? And there's an interesting avenue open to us when thinking about constraints and visibility in character creation. Specifically, what unexpected paths are left open? If you reject the default or the normative, what can you still do? What possibilities are still open? And these creation tools have their own extremes. Edges that allow the creation of avatars that can be seen as opposed to their intended limited customizability. The question then becomes, what kinds of unexpected avatars does it allow us to make, and what can we do with them? So, as a case study in character creation and a mediated experience of gameplay, Monster Factory builds a negotiated critique of the constraints on personhood in mainstream gaming titles. And what becomes, in fact, oppositional or maybe even queer is held in 2 concurrent processes: the social critique embedded in their manipulation of character creation, and the resulting narrative that reintegrates the monster protagonist within the narrative structure of the game. So I guess the place to start is, what is Monster Factory? Monster Factory is a comedy Let's Play series hosted by Justin and Griffin McElroy for the gaming website Polygon. In each episode, the brothers build and manipulate a video game character creator to build an unexpected monster as the video's protagonist, and then play through a portion of the game, usually with some sort of loose narrative arc. The videos range from one-episode explorations with characters such as Toucan Dan in Bloodborne, to one of their most famous creations, the final Pam in Fallout 4, and that's her in the red dress right there. Or even the boy mayor of Second Life, and most recently, DJ Slime Time in Dragon Age Inquisition, which you might remember from the design keynote yesterday. Imbued with pop culture references and a healthy dose of profanity, the hosts develop the mythology of their monsters in a way that positions them in a shared reality that's also grounded in the game world. However, they also push back against the typical straight playthrough of the critical path of the game that many Let's Plays represent, As a result, the videos of Monster Factory are an encapsulation of many of the best parts of remix culture, namely creating something that acknowledges the limitations of the original and moves past it to create something that does a different kind of cultural work. And I'm going to talk about that work in two distinct segments. First, we're going to talk about character creation, and then we'll talk about alternative play. So, in the first segment of every video, the McElroys build their monster. So usually this process involves several iterations of a possible monster before moving through the entirety of the character creator tools one by one, refining both the look of the character and their backstory. The constant refrain of this process is no middle sliders. So I mentioned before the ways in which games place whiteness and maleness at the center of character defaults, the middle of the sliders. So when you remove that option to move towards the center, towards this normative, it's almost impossible to create a character that looks like the marketing materials. Bones move awkwardly, faces squitch and stretch, and you get these unnatural, uncanny results. And this is the negotiated space of edge cases. The extremes and boundaries the designers assume you aren't going to cross, but nevertheless left space for. You might recall yesterday something John Elper mentioned. He mentioned DJ Slime Time. Oh, her. And he said something along the lines of, if this had happened to my game 6 weeks after launch, I would have been really mad someone did this to my game. But it didn't actually do anything to his game. The possibilities to make characters like this were already built in, just not expected. So these kind of resulting monsters of Monster Factory aren't the kinds of characters the game is designed for. And you can see that when assets like clothing clip through noses or chins or ears, and you get glitched game segments working with these characters. The game doesn't process them well, but nevertheless it didn't prevent us from making them, in the same way that it might prevent us from creating, for instance, a dark-skinned woman, but it does allow us to make a toucan. And it feels like hacking in many ways. It both can and can't be contained by the normal within the game. What this helps emphasize is that the limits on what's possible in any given character creator are fairly arbitrary. Creating something unexpected is unexpectedly simple. The absurdity becomes not the character they've created, but in fact the character created that has imposed these arbitrary and absurd limitations on selfhood. Ones that don't allow us to create people who reflect us. So this absurdity acts as a kind of disruption to an implied player. This is a theory that's taken from Espen Arseth of this kind of normal player that the designers imagine playing their game. Instead of internalizing the logics of the game, the arbitrariness of the limits of gameplay comes to the fore and actively oppose it by playing it wrong. Within the manipulation of the character creator itself is the revelation of the game's inability to circumscribe and encapsulate personhood, even within itself. The invisibility of the non-default is rejected, and there is this kind of secret liminal space of monsterhood, which allows for queerness, difference, even if it's still limited. However, if Monster Factory was just messing around in the character creator, it'd be easy to minimize the subversive possibilities of working in this medium and working with these edge cases and boundaries. It could be framed as just kind of a goofy exploration of broken character limitations, or even just a spectacle of difference. But there's something possibly more subversive in what happens next. So I actually do want to back up a little bit because I've made this assumption up to this point about the connections between monstrousness and queerness, as both transgressive in the dominant culture, as intertwined visions of non-normative personhood, and I'd like to make that connection a little bit more explicit. There's this fairly expansive history of queer-coded monsters. In fact, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the formulation of monstrousness is generally built on the signification of marginalization, especially signs of disability and queerness. Queer identification with monsters has a fairly expansive history as well. If you saw Todd Harper's presentation this morning, there's this clear narrative of identifying with the wrongness of monsters, that society tells queer people we are monstrous in some way, and there is power in embracing that and rewriting that. However, the negative connotations of monstrousness are difficult to escape. and especially the tragedy of monsters. Monsters are tied to transgression, which takes on a number of interrelated forms of visual and social disjunction. But the common thread of that traditional monster is tragedy, a rejection and fear of difference. Media monsters almost always die or are removed from society forever. But the monster in Monster Factory isn't a villain, and more than the unlikely product of unexpected extremes or a transgression with no bearing on the larger path of the game, the monster becomes the protagonist. They become lovable and loved, which leads us to this interesting problem: how do you play a game that isn't designed for this character? Well, the answer is you remix. For many gamers in their individual gameplay experiences, that means mods. There's already a rich bibliography on modding as resistant or oppositional play that I'm not going to rehash for you. So I just say that while the queer possibilities of modding are fairly well established, there's usage of modding in Monster Factory that is actually, I think, a specific case of a larger process of remixing and re-narrativization that's made possible by the Let's Play format. And as a Let's Play rather than just an individual experience, Monster Factory is mediating between potential players and the game. So the goal of the play experience isn't just enjoyment on a personal level, or it's providing enjoyment for viewers. And so the extent in which the hosts engage with that kind of critical path of the game varies depending on the character they've developed. So I'm going to give you guys some examples. This is Toucan Dan. So there's kind of two main ways that the McElroys play in Monster Factory. One is kind of close to this critical path or correct route through the game, which is usually built to inscribe normality. But there's usually a slight alteration, a slight twist to it. There are more extreme examples where they completely disregard the critical path of the game to completely re-narrativize what gameplay in that world means. Toucan Dan is an example of this kind of more negotiated style of play that's kind of closer to what the game designers possibly intended. So let me show you a real quick clip and you can kind of see what I mean.
Yeah, Toucan Dan kind of rules.
Toucan Dan, actually, you look pretty sweet. Actually, can I do one? Justin, do you mind if I do one quick tweak? Just to see if I can improve his whole look, just real quick?
Yeah, sure, anything.
Fuck
you.
yes.
Why were we so wedded to having a shirt on?
Yes. Yes! Hey, I'm gonna do something kind of bold here. You ready?
Yeah.
Toucan Dan says no to guns. Toucan Dan is coming at you with a strict no-gun platform. Look at that. He says, what's that? What are you trying to give me, a gun? No guns! Hey, werewolf, guess who's about to get fucked by an anthropomorphic bird? You are.
So that's pretty fun. So what's fun and interesting about Toucan Dan is that actually his story as a gun-hating toucan man actually takes place within the same world and acknowledges the normal constraints on a normal player. While they've added an extra dimension to their play, like the no-gun rule, at the end of the video, they still beat the first boss, fulfilling Toucan Dan's narrative arc in a roundabout way, and moving the critical path of the game forward with this man. But there's actually more extreme playstyle examples where the brothers give their monsters superhuman abilities, with mods or otherwise, that allow them to succeed even in scenarios of hard-coded inevitable failure. And sometimes they even give the monster another goal besides the quest set by the game itself, their own kind of metagame. And on that kind of extreme, we have the Final Pam, who relies on the basic command line tools of Fallout 4 to create an alternative trilogy with the same basic premise as the game itself, managing the personal and larger fallout, if you'll pardon the pun, of the apocalypse. I'm going to show you a short overview clip of her journey. It does contain some gore and strong language, just FYI.
God forgive me. Holy shit! Fuck yes! I do this! Fuck you guys! Yes! Da-da-da-da. Game over! Let me the fuck out of here! Hey everybody, it's me, Rochi, your favorite guy. Oh my god, Rochi despawned. Oh my god, Rochi. Oh fuck, Rochi just despawned. This is the perfect son.
I know he's a wonderful baby.
Hello, metal husband. Do not tell trash talk about our mate.
This is some spooky badass Bloodborne shit. I'm jumping for joy! Yay! I hated that leg! God! It's like the end of the Kira time! Why would you do this?
There's a field with 30 ghost boys.
Oh my god, no! Oh my god, no!
Maybe level 100?
You're right.
So some of the main facets of the final Pam is that she is unkillable, unstoppable, and bent on destroying Fallout 4 as a system. In her hour-long journey, she meets and destroys pretty much everyone she meets. That sounds about right. She thrives on chaos and the power fantasy of being both all-powerful and unkillable. And so these two examples, along with about 30 other monsters, reflect something about a space for these characters, alongside the AAA worlds they live in, one which centers them positively even when the game itself traditionally wouldn't. The narrative of Monster Factory is, at its odd little core, about joyous acceptance. It's hard to ignore the ways in which Monster Factory brims with positivity. Each monster goes through a journey that focuses on their humanity and multifaceted experience, and their journeys are moving towards happiness and fulfillment, even if that fulfillment comes from something unintuitive to us, like becoming the boy mayor of Second Life or gathering all of the knives. Their personhood, value, and meaningful impact on the game is never in question. They are the central characters of Monster Factory's remix of their game. This narrative play pushes it back against the hegemonic structures of mainstream gaming, integrating the edges of the game with the central story. I was going to get to that slide a lot earlier. So it's worthwhile to address that Monster Factory isn't without its problems. It's developed by two straight white men and who do their best, but like all people make mistakes and toe a complicated line between the spectacle of otherness and embracing it. And it's also worth noting that engaging with the metaphor of diversity is not the same as actively doing the work of representation. But there's a lot of possibilities within it. For remix culture and Let's Plays to rewrite the game without ever actually rewiring the game, and help us acknowledge and work with the fact that mainstream AAA titles are closely entwined with dominant cultural formations. Though that these games may attempt to foreclose on marginal narratives, there remains room in our play for bringing the edge cases to the center and finding alternative systems of play that juxtapose themselves with the intended play path. As a not-so-veiled critique of the absurdity of the limitations within mainstream titles, Monster Factory becomes a representative of a set of tools in our continued negotiation and conversation through and about major titles of video games and the hegemonic video game culture. That's my time, and thank you very much.